In France, on the coast of Normandy, in an immense bay, swept by one of the strongest tides on the planet, stands Mont Saint-Michel, a picturesque structure on a block of solid granite. Its feet in the water, its head in the clouds, decorated with an abbey sculpted by man over 1,000 years and frequented by nearly 3 million visitors per year. This stunning rock is as impressive as it is intriguing.
This most amazing architecture, stone-built architecture, reaching into the skies. Wow.
The first time, my breath was taken away.
Both a remarkable abbey and an impenetrable fortress, the distinctive silhouette is famous worldwide. But there are still secrets from its history waiting to be revealed.
There was a belief that we knew everything about Mont Saint-Michel, but what we're finding out is we know virtually nothing.
Nowadays, when the human eye can't see far enough, science and technology can take the reins to try and reveal the invisible and probe the impenetrable.
We can capture the image from inside the pillar without digging or drilling.
By examining the mount from the infinitely big to the infinitely small.
So we'll take the first measurements.
With the help of the most modern scientific tools, today's experts will dissect the work of yesterday's builders to complete this monument's history and expose the mysteries which still elude us.
There are so many constructions built on the rock that we need to see in 3 dimensions.
The Mont Saint-Michel is a whole thing. It's not a landscape, it's not a postcard. It's 13 centuries of history in a 600 million year-old bay.
By probing the depth of this breathtaking structure, built over 1,000 years of successive layers of construction, we can enter the bowels of a 500 million year-old mount and examine its immense bay, declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO and subject to the most powerful tide in Europe.
This stone, which fell from the sky into a marine world, has most likely always intrigued man.
What are the stones of this picturesque abbey hiding? What new discoveries allow us to understand the secret of its resistance when faced with France's longest and most violent conflict?
In terms of military strategy, the architectural combination here is particularly remarkable.
How did a rock appear in the middle of this infinitely flat bay? And what threats is it facing today?
If the sea wasn't there, it would be dramatic.
In 35 to 40 years, the mount would have been reattached to the mainland if nothing had been done.
History, science, construction. Examined like never before, Mont Saint-Michel reveals itself at last, on all scales. The fame of Mont Saint-Michel is thanks in part to the impressive architecture which decorates it. And it's the iconic shape of its sculptural silhouette, carved over the centuries by ancient builders, which intrigues today's experts the most.
When you approach the Mont Saint-Michel Abbey, you are, of course, struck by the sheer size of the buildings.
Mont Saint-Michel is like a jigsaw that is made up of lots of different pieces from different puzzles.
An assembly which might appear disparate elsewhere, and here it creates harmony in a place which is like no other.
The jigsaw-like nature of this spectacular abbey can be explained by the incredible duration of its construction. For over 1,000 years, from the 8th century to the 19th, the construction sites followed one another, each making a new contribution to the structure, shaping a puzzle over 80 meters high that experts are trying to dismantle today to better understand the assembly. The progress of science and technology allows us, little by little, to shine a light in its dark corners and answer this first question: what are the pieces of this unique game of construction hiding? Clues to solve the first mystery are found deep in the bowels of the mount, at the origin of the abbey.
At the heart of the abbey is an ancient church called Notre Dame sous terre, which we rediscovered only a little more than a century ago.
It is the oldest building in the abbey. It is where it all started, actually.
More than 20 meters underneath the abbey's main level, the church of Notre Dame sous terre is entirely hidden away from the exterior. Today, three-dimensional modeling of the mount allows us to see it. This church, 18 meters long and 8 meters wide, could be the answer to the experts' main question. How and where did the construction of the abbey begin? Nowadays, this old chapel is only accessible during rare guided tours. Xavier Bailly has the keys to open it.
We're going into the most ancient part of the abbey.
He is the abbey's administrator, so he knows every room in this unique architectural assembly.
It's always impressive entering this part of the abbey, which is the most secret, the most difficult to access. We are, in a way, inside the bowels of the abbey. The temperature reminds us of that.
According to ancient manuscripts, the abbey's first sanctuary was built in the 8th century and supervised by the bishop, Aubert. For a considerable time, Notre Dame sous terre was thought of as the original sanctuary. But is it really?
The starting point for the enigma that we need to resolve here at Mont Saint-Michel Abbey is, are we in the presumed place of Aubert's first sanctuary? A sanctuary that we know from the chronicles was built at the dawn of the 8th century.
For centuries, Notre Dame sous terre has managed to keep its age a secret. But now, science has found a way of making it talk.
These days, there are several techniques which allow us to date bricks and therefore date the walls fairly accurately.
In effect, we can survey the walls, survey the ground, we can precisely date certain masonry.
One of the methods for dating, which has revealed the age of the old church, is archaeomagnetism. This science is based on the laboratory analysis of the magnetic properties of terracotta. Brick samples were taken from the ancient chapel walls and entrusted to Philippe Lanos, Director of Research at the CNRS.
We are looking to determine the magnetization carried by each specimen here on the tray, which will allow us to find the date that each brick was baked on.
This ever-progressing technique now allows experts to date terracotta from the end of the Paleolithic era to the present, with a precision of just 20 years. To better understand how scientists can use these samples to unravel the mystery of the ancient chapel's construction, you have to look inside the bricks on a microscopic scale.
So we'll take the first measurement.
The bricks' baking date is engraved into their composition. This is because of a simple but fascinating phenomenon. Clay contains ferromagnetic particles. Before being baked, these particles are not fixed in place. They point north and tilt towards the Earth's surface, depending on the Earth's magnetic field, exactly like the needle of a compass. This magnetic field slowly evolves throughout the ages, so the particles take a different position depending on the era. And on the day of their baking, they're immobilized. Their position indicates for eternity the era of their baking, and therefore their age.
And finally, we obtain the average inclination, the average declension, and the magnetic intensity for the measured specimen. The average intensity calculated from all the specimens taken from Notre Dame sous terre shows us that the date must be between 950 and 960 AD.
Examined in a way that was impossible only a few years ago, the hidden church of Notre Dame sous terre has revealed its age. It dates from the 10th century, not the 8th, as many experts thought. The revelation allows them to correct the date when construction began at the abbey.
Thanks to this dating, this small church from the 10th century has revealed more about itself.
It isn't from Saint-Aubert's era.
Notre Dame sous terre is the second structure, chronologically speaking.
It is undoubtedly a church which replaced the first sanctuary.
So, Notre Dame sous terre is only the second piece in this game of construction, but it is still the oldest discovery to date. After it was built, a series of other buildings would accumulate over the centuries. To accommodate a growing influx of pilgrims, builders from the Middle Ages relentlessly built even more ambitious and higher structures.
Mont Saint-Michel is essentially a rock in the sea upon which an entire abbey has been built. Now, abbeys normally get built on flat land, but on Mont Saint-Michel, that's not possible.
The top of the rock measured about 30 meters, yet the monks wanted the church 80 meters long. That's why they decided, and it was completely crazy, to construct a giant artificial plateau at 80 meters altitude on the top of the Mont Saint-Michel.
This building's aim is to reunite on 3 levels what would be horizontal elsewhere.
People don't always realize that when they come to the Mont Saint-Michel, they spend their time walking on vaults and over a void.
The narrowness of the mount forced builders to overlay structures instead of lining them up side by side. To build a new church, they had to design a system of foundations adapted for the site. To the west, they relied on the ancient church Notre Dame sous terre. To the east and to the south, they built crypts on the slope in order to support the building's immense structure.
The engineering of Mont Saint-Michel is absolutely amazing because it's been added to so many times. So not only are you building a temple complex, you're also building it on top of a rock in the middle of the sea.
It's the genius of man that shows in this architecture, which reaches a height that is absolutely incredible for builders from the 13th century.
We talk a lot about the construction of the Mont Saint-Michel, the different stages.
And over history, it's been added to, and bits have fallen down, and bits have been stuck on, and bits have been put over other bits.
Fires, cave-ins. Over 11 centuries of construction, the abbey evidently wasn't safe from catastrophes. And this game of construction and deconstruction complicates the historian's work, but it also leads to new revelations. Behind every collapse lies a crucial clue concerning the history of the abbey, like an area of this Romanesque church called the choir. In the 15th century, the choir collapsed, so the monks replaced it with a flamboyant Gothic choir. And Yves Gallet, an expert in Gothic architecture, recently discovered that this choir was concealing information which would transform the mount's architectural history.
We're in the apse of a church from the end of the Middle Ages, and in general, it looks its age. But if you look at the details, all of the architecture seems older, or refers to older models than those from the era of this part of the church's construction. Which is a little curious. So the question we ask ourselves is, why would an architect from the 15th century use a model from the 13th century structure or the beginning of the 14th?
The architect's unusual choice convinced Yves Gallet that something was hidden behind it. And a discovery from the 1960s strengthened his belief. During the restoration of this choir's tiling, the technicians were forced to remove the lower parts of some of the Gothic pillars.
And we realized that under certain columns, but the survey wasn't carried out entirely, there were Roman relics.
Romanesque relics in a Gothic pillar, so the answer to the architect's choice is to be found in the heart of these massive columns and at their base in the crypt below, large pillars which support the church's choir.
It's their thickness which is remarkable. There are few structures in Gothic architecture with such powerful pillars. We suspect that these pillars weren't entirely new at the moment of the crypt's construction, but more ancient masonry that was reinforced and consolidated. It was that of the first crypt, the crypt which bore the apse that collapsed in 1421. It would be ideal to take a stone out and look at it, but considering what's above our heads, we better not do it. Not today.
But since the 1960s, technology has evolved rapidly. Now it's possible to probe the heart of the columns without breaking them.
This equipment is a GeoRadar, which is dedicated to seeing what there is under the first 50 centimeters, even a meter.
So the principle is simple: an antenna which emits a radio wave, an antenna which receives it.
So now I am starting the acquisition.
GeoRadar allows us to see through the ground or walls. It sends electromagnetic waves at a high frequency which can penetrate solid material. When a wave encounters a change in material, part of it is reflected back to the surface. The reflected energy and the speed of the waves depend on the properties of the material it traverses. So, by sensing these changes, the GeoRadar can detect the depth, density, and position of any buried objects.
We have an image which is both an image of the distance traveled, and here, on this scale, we have time. We can convert this time, which is in fact the time going back and forth, since the waves went into the pillar and came back out in depth.
Those echoes there, what are they linked to?
Well, we can see reflections, which link to what the irregularities of the interior mass will be.
It seems that the inside of the pillar isn't homogeneous. We have a confirmation of what we thought. We have a feeling that inside these columns, there's a more ancient core which is preserved.
It is extremely satisfying, since we have the picture of inside the pillar without digging or drilling.
The revelation allows Yves Gallet to update the history of this abbey's construction.
Basically, the collapse of 1421 was not a complete collapse. The Roman columns from the crypt remained in place, and the architect from the 15th century was asked to rebuild the apse, which had to fit into the remains which were already in place. So a plan was imposed upon him, which gave the Mont Saint-Michel's apse its slightly archaic characteristics. To put it simply, the remains of this previous church dictated, in a way, the new construction plan.
From the outset, it looks homogeneous, and even up close, you start to think, was this all built at one time? But in fact, it wasn't.
Incidentally, this gives the place its singularity and beauty. It is the terracing of these architectural ensembles which are representative of different eras, different styles, and at the same time compose something perfectly harmonious.
The stone that's used is similar throughout all of the island. And because of this, it appears to be homogeneous. It appears to all be one, but it's not.
What's unique about Mont Saint-Michel is that we have trouble making the distinction between geology and architecture. We truly have the impression that we're seeing architecture growing from the geology.
Underneath this unique architectural masterpiece lies an immense hidden block of granite that was once known as the Mont Tombe.
This stone, which fell from the sky into a marine world, has most likely always intrigued man.
When and how was this impressive rock born?
The very essence of Mont Saint-Michel is this granite, and if we date these rocks, we see that they're about 540 to 550 million years old.
This mount, born millions of years ago, didn't come from the sky. But surprisingly, it didn't rise up from the ground either. To solve the mystery behind its stunning appearance, you have to observe it at different scales. You have to both dig into its heart, but also take to the sky. The secret of its origins lies partly in its geological location. With the help of satellite imagery, we can relocate the mount. The flat bay on which it sits is actually part of an ancient mountain range, eroded by time, the Armorican Massif.
Mont Saint-Michel is really part of the Armorican Massif. These mountains were as high as the Alps or the Himalayas. But this mountain range no longer exists anymore because it's been eroded. There's no relief around us. You can't ski in Normandy or Brittany.
So why is the Mont Tombe still visible? The answer to this question lies in the rock's remarkable formation. 550 million years ago, this rock was in a liquid state, a single gigantic bubble of molten magma at more than 1,000 degrees, straight from the bowels of the Earth.
We as geologists say that it's a magmatic rock, so it's all in the name. It means it's a rock which comes from magma.
So this is what we call eruptive or intrusive rocks, which means these rocks of molten magma appeared at the Earth's crust.
So it was a bubble of magma which rose through the Earth's crust, but didn't arrive at the surface. If one arrives at the surface, it creates a volcano. But when they rise up underneath mountain ranges, you understand that underneath those mountain ranges, the Earth's crust has become creased, so there will be folds. And these folds stop magma from rising up.
Trapped at the root of the Armorican Massif, this giant bubble of magma cooled to become a block of solid granite. But the mountain range which surrounded it was composed of a rock called schist. It's the difference between these two minerals which explain how the mountains disappeared, while the rock of Mont Saint-Michel survived. At a microscopic scale, we discovered that the Mount's granite is composed of crystals of quartz, feldspar, and mica, which creates its extraordinary resistance. The schist of the bay is made up of layers of softer sediment which eroded over time.
Then the rest of the ground has been eroded away, and suddenly you see this kind of almost like sugar loaf of a rock in the sea.
Erosion, little by little, stripped the surrounding area, and we saw this piece of rock appear, eventually rising from the deepest depths of the earth and emerging between two neighbors, the island of Tombelaine, which is situated just behind, and the Mont Dol, which is nowadays a little further inland on the Breton side.
From the very beginning of its creation, Mont Saint-Michel has distinguished itself with incredible endurance. Even once sculpted by man, it continued to stand the trials of time, becoming a formidable military fortress. Despite its location on the front line of English invasions since the Middle Ages, Mont Saint-Michel never fell to invaders and became the last French stronghold on the Normandy coast.
Mont Saint-Michel and Saint Michael symbolize resistance.
It became the emblem of France during the later stages of the 100 Years' War because it was the only fortified place in Normandy which resisted successfully the English.
Twice the English tried to take Mont Saint-Michel, and they failed twice. And it was just considered as an impregnable fortress.
Now, explorations of the Mount's fortifications are revealing clues about the history of military strategy here. Investigators want to solve an enduring mystery. How did this isolated mount, with just a small military force, resist some of the most violent and lengthy assaults in history? Archaeologist François Caligny de la Haye, with a team from the National Institute for Preventative Archaeological Research, has been investigating the site. He wants to reveal the strategic evolution of the fortifications in all of its complexity, but the steep-sided site makes it a tricky location to study.
The Mont Saint-Michel has had an eventful history, and this history is very difficult to understand because we're on a site with extremely complex topography. Hi, it's good for me. We at last have a mapped vision of what a traditional village could be like. We need a three-dimensional vision, you see. There are so many constructions built on the rock that the site is extremely complex to understand.
Like most archaeologists, François usually works on the ground on a macroscopic scale. He usually works with information drawn from the study of ancient documents or discovered by the naked eye during excavation. But today, working with a team of drone operators,
You can go up.
he changes his scale of observation.
There, we see very well.
Now, François can examine the evolution of the ramparts in more detail. An evolution which, just like the history of the abbey, was written over several stages and centuries.
For a long time, we estimated that the Mont Saint-Michel didn't need fortifications because we're on a site which is naturally protected by both the sea, which engulfs the bay twice a day, as well as the rock's steep slope.
But this rock was quite vulnerable, in the beginning at least, because the village wasn't protected by ramparts.
It was only protected by wooden fences.
And in 1204, the Breton troops, allied with the King of France, Philip Auguste, managed to get into the village and set it on fire, and the abbey too.
So they drew the necessary conclusions.
Mont Saint-Michel invested in its ramparts. It increased its protections.
In the 13th century, the wooden fence was replaced with stone ramparts. The aim was to protect the village, which at the time was concentrated on the higher ground.
So here we have the old layout from the 13th century, the Tour Claudine, so you need to get just above it. That section there corresponds to the outer wall from the 13th century. And from the angle marked by the curtain wall, go straight ahead, flying over the houses. And so these houses were in fact built under the influence of the outer wall of the 13th century. The images that we have here show that in the Mont Saint-Michel's current grounds, we still have elements from the 13th century, which are preserved in the boundaries of the grounds.
Over time, the village grew and became too big for these stone ramparts, which could no longer protect it.
The church starts at the top. The village begins to grow up around it.
During the 100 Years' War, the fortifications had to be enlarged to protect all of the houses that had been built outside the first ramparts.
So the Mont Saint-Michel became a genuine stronghold.
So that it didn't fall into the hands of the English, who, at the time, held the whole of Normandy.
To face the urgent threat of English troops, the Mount strategists built a line of ramparts on the beach, close to the tide level. Now the English had nowhere to dock and go ashore.
The Mont Saint-Michel had improved its defences. It had brought its ramparts all the way down so that the walls virtually touched the sea. So there was no way of bringing siege engines in. There was no way of getting boats in because you'd just get stranded on the sand.
But the English were determined to bring down the impenetrable Mont Saint-Michel. So, in 1423, they decided to settle on the island of Tomblaine, just 3 kilometers from the gates of the citadel, starting a siege that would last 30 years. The Mount's military strategists would be forced to adapt their defenses again.
The English were close, just there, close by, at Tomblaine.
The English twice tried to get their hands on the rock.
We're not just talking, oh, look, there's an island with a monastery on it, we're going to take it. They threw everything they had at it. They went at it all guns blazing.
That forced the Mount's captain to rethink the entrance of the Mont Saint-Michel. Beforehand, it was accessed from the large door to the east.
So the weakest point was the door.
This eastern door was almost directly opposite the island of Tomblaine, where the English were based. So, the captain of the fortifications, Louis d'Estouteville, decided to seal this entrance and construct a new door to the south on the other side of the mount. Now, the English troops would be forced to go around, spending longer in the open at the foot of the fortifications, at the mercy of French fire.
In fact, after sealing the eastern door, if the English wanted to take the Mont Saint-Michel and pass through the southern door, they were obliged to go under the ramparts and towers on foot. So here, evidently, on the parapets, the French garrison was there with muskets and crossbows. Incidentally, on the parapets, we still see the marks of archers from the past that protected the ramparts and also allowed the garrison to be able to shoot at the enemy situated on the pebble beach.
The new southern door is now used by visitors to Mont Saint-Michel, while the old door on the east has remained hidden ever since the conflict. By examining information found in ancient texts and investigating the buildings here, François has managed to locate the door behind a tower called Demi-Lune.
So here you'll be able to approach the demi-lune. It's not really a tower, it's masonry in the shape of a tower, which seals this entrance from the 14th century. We can see very well. This is the first time I've seen aerial views of the Mont Saint-Michel like this. And it's truly interesting because we're working from the ground as archaeologists and also from plans, ancient plans. And now seeing an aerial view of the mount is extremely interesting.
Discoveries by François and his team are revealing little by little the history of military strategy of this fortress. Now, during restoration of the northern rampart, the existence of a special watchtower known as an échif has been revealed.
The échif allows the protection of the ramparts, a flanking of the rampart between the northern tower and the bartizan, which was here. It served also as latrines for the garrison when they were on watch.
An échif is a temporary wooden structure set on top of the walls and fitted onto the ramparts. It reinforced the defense of the outer walls, providing lateral protection, an important role where the wall turns a corner. This structure perfectly complemented the strategy of moving the doors, forcing the English to go underneath. François, with an architect specializing in historic monuments, made this extraordinary discovery thanks to a faint clue. Traced into the sides of a parapet, they discovered the remains of an ancient opening 2.4 meters wide.
So here, on the parapet, we can still see the mark of the door which allowed entrance inside the échif. Here we have the right left foot of the door going up here, and there we have two stones which correspond to the right foot.
These details seem tiny compared to the immense scale of the mount, but they are important clues in the quest to better understand the island's defense strategy.
In terms of military strategy, everything is well thought out at Mont Saint-Michel. The manner in which the fortifications are attached to those of the abbey, this combination and this architectural evolution is particularly superb here.
Mont Saint-Michel's military strategists adapted their defenses as they faced varied threats over the centuries. But they also benefited from an extraordinary natural protection. The sea.
The sea is one of Mont Saint-Michel's main defenses.
I mean, it is an island. It's in the sea. It's the greatest tidal range in all of Europe. And it's surrounded by quicksand.
It's a logistical nightmare for the military.
As soon as they tried to bring cannon by rafts or boats across and offload them onto the sands outside Mont Saint-Michel, it took time to do that. The tide would start coming back in again. They lost their cannon or they have to set off again. It was a hopeless task.
Upon arrival, they had to turn back because the tide was coming in.
The origin of this quicksand is loose sediment carried into the bay by the coming and going of the tide. But here, in the seas around Mont Saint-Michel, the natural phenomenon of the tide is expressed in a very unusual way.
The tides at Mont Saint-Michel are amongst the 5 biggest tides in the world, with a tidal range of 15 meters between high and low tide.
The tidal range is the difference between the lowest tide and the highest tide. 15 meters, it's absolutely gigantic. Hard to imagine.
Once again, it's by using satellite images and locating the mount within the expanse of the bay that we can understand the origin of its exceptionally powerful tides.
Here, we're in the Sea of English Channel, which is a very particular bottleneck which creates tides that manifest here, like nowhere else. And it's one of the only places in the world where we have an alignment of Earth, Moon, Sun, which generates a tide which forms this landscape and which fills Mont Saint-Michel with sediment.
These unique tides carry the sediment that creates quicksand around the mount. To uncover the secret of how quicksand is formed, hydraulics expert Normandy is accompanied by Sylvie, one of the bay's official guides. Guides are the only people authorized to approach the quicksand.
So quicksand is most likely to be found in rivers, on riverbanks, and in former riverbeds.
To trigger the phenomenon of quicksand, the team need to add some energy.
There, that's pretty good.
There, it's going quickly.
You think of a poor traveller or tourist being sucked down and disappearing into quicksand. That, of course, is false. You can't sink down into quicksand entirely because of buoyancy. You can sink, let's say, at worst up to your waist. But the problem is still being stuck when the tide comes in.
The action of quicksand can be explained by its structure. Undetectable from the surface, you need to probe the depth to reveal its secrets. The structure is made up of thin layers of clay, water, sand, and salt. When there's pressure and energy on the surface, the layers give way. The water escapes and the sand solidifies around whatever has sunk down.
And I've got to get the water back around my ankles and around my legs to get out.
But the loose sediment that forms this quicksand presents a danger to the entire bay too, due to sandbanks which are moving ever closer to the mount. The sediment is carried in by the site's particularly powerful tides and then deposited in the bay, trapped by another one of the bay's characteristics.
It's a special characteristic because the tidal currents at the rising tide are much stronger than the tidal currents at ebbing tide. So a lot of the sediment will not be washed away by the ebbing tide, only part of it will be washed away.
And this was the beginning of the filling in of the bay as we know it today, and with each tide there are successive layers.
Which means that today we have the impression that the sea is coming less and less to the foot of the mount.
Mont Saint-Michel has resisted the erosion of time and the most violent military assaults. But now, its very existence as an island is under threat by the influx of sediment.
In the 1990s, we saw the salt meadows. So, salt meadows are natural prairies which develop in the sands around the rock, approaching Mont Saint-Michel in a worrying way.
Mont Saint-Michel wouldn't be Mont Saint-Michel without the sea.
If the sea wasn't there, it would be dramatic. 1,300 years of history are linked to its isolation, totally and intimately linked to its isolation.
This exceptional area, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, might undergo drastic transformation if nothing is done to protect it from the encroaching sandbanks. But the phenomenon has only been aggravated by the hand of man, most significantly with the 19th century construction of a road along a concrete dike.
The dike road was an umbilical cord between Mont Saint-Michel and the continent, 2 kilometers away. However, the problem with this dike is that it accentuated the sandbank problem. So, in 1995, major restoration work to re-establish its marine characteristics were launched, and it was urgent to do so.
The restoration work, which ended in 2015, led to the replacement of the road dike by a bridge overpass which doesn't block currents, and the construction of a new dam designed to divert sediment back out to sea. The colossal dam located on the river Quicksand, downstream from the mount, is the project's most impressive and ambitious work. This unique structure, 138 meters long, 32 meters wide, and 10 meters high, took 15 years of detailed planning and a further 15 years of construction before it was completed. Romain Deguet supervises the operation of the dam.
My role from day to day is to ensure that the dam works correctly and above all, depending on its impact, to improve its operation one day at a time. So here's the dam's control room. All of the dam's control takes place here. So here you can see all of the 8 valves, from the first one to the 8th one. The 2 fish bypasses right bank and left bank. A global view of the dam in view of the entrance to the dam's control room. This dam is unique in the sense that it functions in both directions.
During the rising tide, strong currents from the sea travel towards the Quicksand River, carrying a large quantity of sediment. By closing the dam's valves, Romain can block the sediment-laden water. When the currents subside at high tide, the sediments settle to the seabed and become trapped at the foot of the dam. The water above is now clear and free of sediments. After the settling phase, the valves tilt to release the clear seawater into the Quesnon, allowing the volume of water to rise considerably. When the tide draws the sea back, the currents are much weaker, leaving the sediment behind. Then, at low tide, the dam's valves open, this time from underneath, freeing the large volume of water stored in the Quesnon. This provokes a flushing system. As the water is released, it carries the sediment too, sending it back out to the sea.
After more than 9 years of operation, we have already recovered about 60 hectares of what we call marine lands. These are lands which are regularly submerged by the tide.
Since the dam was built in 2009, regular surveys of the bay using terrestrial and airborne lasers have made it possible to precisely quantify the volume of deposited and flushed sediment. Between 2009 and 2018, there has been a significant decline in the amount of sediment upon which greenery and salt meadows have taken hold.
Since the dam was put in place, during the highest tides, Mont Saint-Michel is once again completely surrounded by the sea.
So for 20 years, it's been putting the island back to as it was, basically an island in the sea.
Mont Saint-Michel's isolation, for the moment, has been saved. The sea is the backdrop of the mount, but it's also its history.
You shouldn't forget one thing. It's that the pilgrims had to wait for the sea to open up to get there.
Mont Saint-Michel is there, within sight, but inaccessible to anyone because of the sea. But then the sea opens up. The sea withdraws and lets us pass. Isn't that miraculous? Isn't that the most beautiful biblical evocation of those chosen people? The sea letting them pass?
It's almost as if it's been gifted by God. It's almost like the biblical scene where Moses parts the Red Sea.
In the Middle Ages, people spoke of Saint Michael at risk from the sea. It's a place that has to be earned.
And you're a pilgrim and you've been walking hundreds, if not thousands of miles. And then suddenly, you see this most amazing architecture, stone-built architecture, reaching into the skies. Wow.
So they felt they had really arrived close to heaven when they got to the other side.
It's almost impossible to approach Mont Saint-Michel's history without reaching mysteries that scientific tools aren't equipped to investigate, the spiritual aspect of the site. But today, this feature of the site is tackled by experts who recently started to investigate the founding legend of the sacred mount, dedicated to the Archangel Saint Michael. Mont Saint-Michel owes its name to the Archangel Saint Michael. At the peak of the mount, 156 meters up, an imposing iron statue, covered in gold, has dominated the base since the end of the 19th century. But recently, in the spring of 2016,
it returns, dazzling, serene, at 160 meters above sea level.
This 1,140-pound and 4.5-meter Archangel descended to Earth. For 2 months, gilders and restoration experts worked to return it to its original brilliance and to repair damages caused by lightning and bad weather. The restoration was part of work to upgrade the abbey's protection against lightning. The statue's sword and wings are formed from copper, an electrically conductive metal, and an additional lightning conductor has been fitted to its wings. Today, this Archangel protects man from lightning, but his original mission was very different.
Saint Michael is an important and dreaded character. Basically, he approves or denies your entrance into heaven.
In the Middle Ages, we started to consider the Archangel as being a kind of knight from the sky, a character who was capable of fighting and finally beating the forces of evil.
Saint Michael holds the scale. He's the one who weighs your soul the day of the final judgment. So he has in his hands an object that will determine your fate for eternity, whether you will go to heaven or hell.
If people came on a pilgrimage to Mont Saint-Michel, it was in some way to secure the favors of the Archangel. He was a character that was feared.
So why did builders choose to construct this abbey on such an inaccessible rock in honor of the feared Archangel? The answer to this mystery lies in a text from the 12th century called the Revelatio. This manuscript is the oldest known account of the founding of Mont Saint-Michel in the 8th century.
It's thanks to this text of the Revelatio that we know a little about the circumstances of the creation of the first church dedicated to the Archangel at the peak of the rock.
In fact, the text explains in Latin how the Bishop of Avranches, Aubert, was visited several times by Saint Michael and asked to build a sanctuary in his honor.
We discover that Mont Saint-Michel was born from a dream. In fact, during his sleep, Bishop Aubert saw the apparition of the Archangel Saint Michael.
But the bishop took quite some time before fulfilling the Archangel's wishes.
Seeing as the Archangel hadn't been obeyed, during his third visit, he placed his finger against the head of the sleeping Bishop of Avranches,
which, according to the legend of the revelation, left a hole in his skull.
Bearing the scar from the Archangel's finger on his pierced skull, Bishop Aubert obeyed and built a sanctuary on a rock called the Mont Tombe, that would later become known as Mont Saint-Michel. Now, 1,000 years later, scientists have become interested in this legend because of a troubling discovery, a clue they now have the means to analyze, which is preserved in the Basilica of Avranches.
At the beginning of the 11th century, we found a skull with a hole in it there.
I'm about to take the skull of Saint Aubert out of its reliquary. Saint Aubert, who is also known for being the founder of the Mont Saint-Michel. The particularity of this human skull is evidently the perforation that we have on the right parietal, and which was interpreted as being the result of the third apparition of Saint Michael to Aubert.
Here we have the proof from this relic that the Archangel's finger was placed on the skull of the Bishop of Avranches.
This hole in the skull is the visible and tangible proof of the Archangel's intervention and of this idea that he literally wanted to put the idea of building an abbey on the Mont Saint-Michel into his head.
So, there is the proof that everything happened like it was told in the story.
But in the 21st century, can this historical mystery resist the progress of technology, which now gives access to ever greater scales of observation?
What really interests us is the hole on the right parietal bone.
The skull was the object of medical expertise, so a specialist in paleopathology, the study of ancient diseases, Dr. Tillot, has addressed the issue.
Dr. Pierre-Léon Tillot analyzed the sacred relic in a medical scanner, examining the suspicious hole. His aim was to collect scientific data and make a medical diagnosis. The lines of inquiry were numerous, from cancer to ancient surgery. But the specialist finally concluded that the hole was caused by an epidermoid cyst.
A cyst, in fact, happens when the skull is formed. When the skull grows together, a tip of epidermis gets stuck. It's like if you blow into a balloon through a ring. You have the balloon, which is blown up on both sides, and a perfect circle in the middle. This is a little bit similar to what happened in Aubert's skull.
It is very interesting that the scientists didn't dare show that Saint Aubert was a man like the rest.
So, in fact, today we know, or almost know, the reason for this hole. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this isn't the skull of the Bishop of Avranches, even if the hole wasn't left there by the Archangel after his apparition.
There wasn't sufficient medical knowledge in the Middle Ages for the imagination not to run wild, to wonder, to build legend, exercise one's faith, which all contributed to the story of Saint-Aubert, which also contributed to the construction of Mont Saint-Michel.
And you see, it's also proof that there are still things to discover.
Whether explaining its legend, probing its construction, or deciphering natural phenomena, new science and research is revealing the secrets of Mont Saint-Michel in a way that was impossible before. Piece by piece, 1,000 years of this site's unique and complex history has been written, updated, and corrected, but it hasn't given up all its secrets yet.
What's left to be discovered at the Mont Saint-Michel?
Do we know everything about Mont Saint-Michel today? Maybe not.
It's difficult to know what's left to be discovered when we don't know what we're going to find.
We're surprised to discover it, despite having the impression that we'd seen it many times before.
It's obvious. We don't know everything about Mont Saint-Michel. And perhaps we'll never know everything.
We are in the presence of an extremely well-known, visited and popular monument, but with a mysterious side.
We know virtually nothing. Every time a stone is unturned, every time a tree falls over, we find out something new about this remarkable island.
It has lasted for 1,300 years, and this place will still be magical long after we're gone.